The future of food is being created as we speak, and the science fiction of today might become the science fact of tomorrow. I'm your host, Mike Lee. I'm a food futurist, innovator, and author. Each week, we explore today's signals to reveal tomorrow's possibilities. We'll challenge assumptions, we'll question conventional wisdom, we'll imagine what could be, and talk to the innovators who are shaping what will be. This is the Tomorrow Today Show. Let's get started. Hello, world, and welcome to the Tomorrow Today Show. I'm your host, Mike Lee. Today, we are talking about the future of agriculture, the thing that touches just about every single part of our lives, but most people don't actually see on a day-to-day basis. So we're going to explore what the state of agriculture is today, how we got here, and we're going to share some visions from our great guests today and our guest co-host about where the future could lead for this. We have three wonderful guests on the call today. We've got Stephen Ritz. He is the founder and guy that runs head honcho, I guess, of the Bronx Machine in South Bronx. We're going to talk about education and urban farming with him. We're going to talk to Alec Gioseffi, who is the head chef and head farmer at Ironbound Farm, one of my favorite places in the world to go hang out in and eat. And he's going to talk about his experience as not only a chef, but a farmer, and trying to do the two together and see how those two worlds can collide and kind of promote a sense of better agriculture and regeneration. And then last but not least, we're going to close out with Ryan Pintado-Vertner. He is the founder of a strategy agency called Smoketown. He focuses a lot on regenerative things and trying to get consumers on board with the regenerative movement. So we will have a jam-packed day today of super amazing guests to talk to. But as usual, I am not alone here. I am here with today's guest co-host, Tina Owens. She is founder of Snowehaven Regeneration. Tina and I go way back, working in a lot of different contexts together, and I'm excited to have you on the show today as today's guest host. Tina, how are you?
Great, Mike. Thanks for having me because now we get to actually record and formalize a conversation that's been ongoing for several years between the two of us. So really looking
Yeah,
forward to today.
I feel like we're almost gonna like try to replay all of the different conference and like happy hour conversations we've had in the past at different shows, right? Because yeah, you're one of my favorite people to talk to about this. Not for the least that you actually live on a farm. How about that? Tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, so I come from a multi-generational farming and dairy family, and when my work in the food system kept creeping closer to agriculture, my husband and I decided that we needed to go kind of back to the roots, if you will, from both of our families. And we started Snowehaven Farm, and we raise heritage pastured animals for nutrient dense outcomes. I know you know they're nutrient dense because you've actually tasted some of our food. So
They're
we raise
delicious.
pork and silvopasture lambs and rotational grazing and free range poultry, and are regenerating land that has been degraded from decades of conventional agriculture. So walking the talk.
That's amazing. So that's maybe a good place to start. Like maybe not how would you characterize where we are today as a country, agriculture wise? And maybe like, how did we get here? Like the good, the bad, and the ugly. Like, what's the deal today?
Um, well, it's hard to talk about today without understanding some of the macro systems that have helped us get to where we're at in kind of a pragmatic, a pragmatic, fragmented approach that's not
Fragmented.
really
Yeah.
not really working quite for anybody, honestly. Farmers are struggling to make a profit on even commodity-based systems where the costs are well known. Um, Consumers are struggling to get access to food that feels like it has the right level of transparency attached to it. We have crop insurance systems that are kind of supporting legacy agriculture and keeping farmers locked into systems where they actually want to be able to innovate into things like cover crops or regenerative agriculture. And most of the comments I'm going to make today are actually based on the row crop systems that are two-thirds of what's grown in the Midwest, which is mostly for fuel and feed. But clearly there's also other very large pieces of agriculture, including the fruit basket in California, and 80% of the
Hmm.
world's almonds grown in. in California, diverse fruit and nut crops across the US, from Washington state apples to Georgia pecans and Wisconsin cranberries and Maine timber industries. But as the industrialization of agriculture really began in fields with row crops and tillage, and chemical use, it seems right to use that as kind of a shorthand for how some of the rest of the systems then took up those same practices on things that used to be hand harvested, like berry patches and bushes and trees and
Yeah.
prairies with grazing. And that move to turn farms and soil into factories and treating them as kind of a inert medium,
Yeah.
in a nutshell, is encapsulating how we ended up where we're at today. So I'll leave it there and see where you want to go next as far as the arc of the conversation.
I've thought this, I don't know if you share this sentiment. I certainly have the sentiment that it's sort of an irony or a cognitive dissonance that I kind of wake up, in America. I was born here and just think like, wow, we've got all these issues with the ag system the way it is. But sort of like the big green revolution, all this stuff happening post World War II, it's also kind of gotten us as a country to like where we are in the world, right? So it's sort of this, I don't know if guilty is the right word, but it certainly props up a big part of our country, yet there's so many kind of flaws with it. And I think that propping up was, I think the people that probably started it, I'm not in their head, but they probably just said, we gotta grow, baby, grow, right? And just kind of keep things up. Like, I don't know, do you get that sense of that tension ever?
Yes, and I think that's also somehow responsible for where we're at, because on the surface, some of the, let's say, chemicals, fertilizers, pesticides, practices, what have you, that started getting used in the field on the surface looked like they were providing bigger plants, better yield, etc. And now
Yeah.
that we leaps forward in science, we understand that it was at the expense of things like nutrition and certainly at the expense of soil health,
Yeah.
in a way that has been unmasked, and yet the
Yeah.
system is still working on, go big or go home, bigger plants, better yield, etc. And in many ways, it's still hitting those metrics, but at a cost to basically every other system at this point. Whether it's
Yeah.
health or profitability or affordability or erosion, water quality, runoff. Um, climate change, just so many different elements of daily life, that it is
Yeah.
time that we actually took a page turned a big page rather on what needs to happen, not just in agriculture systems, but the economic systems that benefit and or prop up the way, business as usual is occurring. So it's one of the reasons I was interested in talking with you about this today, because we're at a watershed moment where I think we're in a big before and after systems awareness and understanding. And the
Yeah.
very foundations of the agriculture system and the political systems that support it are being shaken right as we speak.
Yeah.
So, you and I are going to look back at this moment as a pivotal moment of change and try to dissect for others why we were where we were in the past and how where we're going is needs to be shaped in a way that's benefiting more than just those that have a locked up commodity supply.
Yeah. And I think that gives me hope and solace too, because I think just as easily as, whoever created the current system, there was a day before the system existed and they said, let's create this, right? And then they created it. And now here we are. We have the equal opportunity to say, hey, let's create something different or new, right? And so you can always re-engineer things as you need to. Well, so momentum, right? Because you're right. Like a lot of CPG manufacturers, basically a lot of the downstream food system is kind of dependent on this commodity system. I mean, like, I think big CPG, I don't know if it would exist in its current form, its current iteration, without big ag the way it is, right? So don't you think that like if we're going to renovate the ag system, we kind of have to renovate the expectations downstream too? Because like Kellogg's only kind of succeeds as the model if they're printing endless amounts of monoculture wheat, or
Well,
version
Kellogg's is
1.0 at
an
least.
interesting case study to pick on because they don't actually exist anymore. And, it is one of those structures where the pass through from the commodity system is what got passed on to the consumer, I would say somewhat without question.
Yeah.
And when the consumer started asking for things like non-GMO project verified or other things, um, the consensus that the existing commodity system was safe, and unwilling somewhat to take a critical look at what was happening in the soil with nutrition or with inputs that get passed through in what we actually eat. I would say that's been part and parcel of the broader food system. It's not specific to any one company.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something I witnessed from the inside out working on non-GMO and organic food systems since 2008. And the consumer demand that has remained steady in wanting to have more transparency in their food and understanding how it impacts their own health. And now that we're at a parts per billion level of being able to map at a molecular level what's going on with food and how it interrelates with not only natural ecosystems, but also with our bodies, our microbiomes, long term health, we're at a moment where the consumers that were questioning things intuitively have really been proven right in what the problems were that were foundational to the food they were consuming. And same with the
Right.
farmers that have, kind of been accused of, let's say, tree hugging or doing it out of some sort of sense of, nature taking precedence to everything. And I'm not saying I disagree with that. I'm saying that people would look at that and make the economic case that you were making people suffer on the other end of that nature protection. And yet, at the end of the day, the regenerative systems have proven that there are benefits to both soil and our human health that are foundational to all of the costs of society, whether it's our health insurance or how many days that we miss of work from being ill, or whether or not we have latent vitamin deficiencies that are causing us to feel, kind of a general malaise or have brain fog or what have you. And all of that is rooted in food and what we're willing to pay for, what we subsidize, and the story that we tell ourselves about our food system and how it's feeding us. And that's where there's still a big transformation taking place that needs to catch up to the state of the science as it relates to um, soil health is human health, is nutrition, is
Yeah.
yeast. All of those things are interwoven in a way that we never could have imagined even 20 years ago.
So walk us through that because you do a lot of interesting things. Some of the most interesting work that I think you do is your work with the nutrient on nutrient density and how it's connected to soil. For maybe the layperson that doesn't spend all their time paying attention to agriculture, it may not be intuitive immediately how like, oh, what does soil have to do with me? But maybe like break that down. Like what happens when you have good soil or bad soil to the food you eat, and why should the average person care about soil that might be thousands of miles away growing their salad?
Oh, well, let me give
It's a
a
lot.
tiny bit of
Yeah.
background here, and I'll try and do this in the shortest period of possible to answer your question as well, Mike. Because I got introduced to regenerative agriculture with the concept embedded that nutrient density was tied to it. I was very lucky in that the way that I learned about soil health mattering for yield and nutrition and all of these other things was from some of the leading work at Chico State with Dr. Cindy Daly and specifically Dr. Tim LaSalle. And this was around 2016, and in 2017 Chico actually provided the first mainstream base definition of regenerative agriculture practices that has really stood the test of time. It's foundational to the rest of the industry and shows up in one way or form in every single regenerative effort, certification, practice, or outcomes based adoption that's out there. So I spent 8 years from 2016, or sorry, from 2018 actually until uh, now, working on what the role is of brands, food, and consumers in purchasing and creating demand for regenerative systems, and what could compel consumers to see their own health within those
Yeah.
agricultural production systems. So let's talk about the question that I would get the most, which is where's the science? And the answer is that it is there at a like United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization level. It's there at an individual academic level. It's been vetted in the scientific hallways. What hasn't happened is it hasn't been translated into how we go and purchase a product and what the product says on the side of it as it relates to nutrition. And so, what I undertook in nutrient density work was helping to set the stage for where the consumer demand was, what the level of awareness was, what was the process by which brands could or could not actually put that on package, and what role did the USDA or the FDA play, and the types of claims that could be made. And In a nutshell, there is a process by which nutrition is currently tested for and put on products, and that same process can be followed, with a very glaring exception on animal proteins. It actually can't be covered. And that's because the USDA mandates what the standard labeling is on the side of each animal protein product. So whether you're talking about eggs or milk or chickens or beef, it's basically the same. And getting into that deeper and understanding what was happening at the laboratory level, showing that, grass-fed, humane raised, pastured animals have a better nutritional profile that somehow can't wind up in something on the package, the barrier for consumers. Um, what we're doing is we're actually using science from 3 decades ago of what the nutrition was of a chicken 3 decades ago, and that's still what's being put on the side of every single chicken. And so, as a consumer, you're not even able to delineate between a chicken that's pasture raised and the nutrition behind it, and a chicken that's raised in confinement, and what the nutritional differences are for your own health.
So wait, let me get that straight. So if I am a brand and I make, I don't know, let's say tortilla chips, right? I got to send that to a lab. I got to get that tested. They're going to tell on the label. I have to write on the label all the nutrients in these tortilla chips, et cetera, right? And that process, in theory, works pretty well. But you're saying that if I'm a breeder of chickens, there's no such testing mandated or required. I just kind of whatever. It doesn't matter how I'm growing this chicken. The label on my chicken is going to be the chicken data, the nutritional data from decades ago. Is that true?
There's a couple of workarounds, and if I'm selling directly to my consumer and I have done laboratory testing and I pass that along. But if you're selling in a grocery store and you're processing in a USDA facility, and there are rules around how the chicken has to be processed and packaged, et cetera.
Yeah, sure.
But that standard label that goes on every single one, I've been assured by those who work in the animal protein space that that information has actually just been carried forward year to year,
Oh,
despite the fact that everything has changed in what genetics the chicken has, how they're raised, what they're eating, the antibiotics they consume, et cetera. And we're now at a point where even what we have on package is not necessarily indicative of the food that's in the box. And so, if I'm a nutritionist, a dietitian, I may be basing my calculations on something that's actually quite outdated. And I've never had this conversation or even been aware that the way the animal is raised matters for things like outcomes and medically tailored meals or what have you. And
yeah.
so, after I will say got it off my chest in the white paper that we wrote for the Nutrient Density Alliance about the process, the policy, the regulatory guidance, and the fact that it was missing for animal proteins, and where the science was, of course, at that fundamental question. I had recruited in a registered dietitian, Mary Purdy, to backfill me at the Nutrient Density Alliance because I could see that the nuance in the science of translating this to human health, but also the nuance in how specific claims are made on package needed to be part of the dialogue in a way that wasn't my expertise once you got beyond, process, policy, business case, et cetera. And so that work has now taken off in more of a human health vein and including really big companies. And there's a protein working group around how we deal with the regulatory guidance on things like pasture raised poultry and how it gets how it gets packaged and the label on it. But that's going to take a concerted effort over the course of several years with regulatory guidance
Yeah.
from USDA. So there's still a lot more
Wow.
to do there in creating that business case for consumers where you walk into a store and you can see the difference in the chicken nutrition right on the package.
Well, and so in a sense, if the nutritional content of a chicken or a beef or something like that hasn't changed for decades, that also kind of disincentivizes, like if you're a Tyson or a big company, to try harder to raise a more nutritious chicken, right?
I would say you actually wouldn't necessarily want to have this conversation because it would shed light poorly on your existing portfolio where your nutrition is actually
That's what
falling
I
below,
mean.
right? So,
Yeah.
yeah, so then the system becomes kind of the inertia comes from the system itself in having kicked the can down the road for so long that to have the conversation at this moment feels like an unmasking of things that are
Yeah.
inconvenient truths. I I will say, given the political moment, it's one of those places where if I could ring up, the MAHA movement, if you will, and
Yep.
understanding what it is that we need to shift, this is one of those big conversations that it's past time that we had as a
Yeah.
society. And it also will help us all in understanding food in relation to our own health, not just in calorie counting and understanding what we're consuming from conventional foods, but understanding why it's so critically important that we invest in regenerative agriculture and nutrition and soil health as it relates to human
Yeah.
health.
Yeah. Okay, so in a nutshell, basically, we now kind of have a much better grasp scientifically on understanding the idea that, if soil is a certain amount of quality, higher quality or nutrition wise, the food will, in most cases or in some cases or a lot of cases, be also more nutrient dense. Is that fair to say, or are we still trying to figure that out?
There's more nuance to it than just that, but that is a universal truth. The
Yeah.
nuance is that the varietal might matter. And
Sure.
so if you're growing a
But all
breed that
things being
actually doesn't
equal.
if you're growing a breed that doesn't do well in that soil, or it's in the wrong region, like it's cold hardy and you're in Florida or
Yeah,
something,
yeah.
right? So how is the plant actually set up to signal with the land it's being grown in? And conversely, what is happening in plant breeding and genetic modification and gene editing is that some of the plants have been bred solely to rest on a synthetic input system, and they'd
Mm-hmm.
lost the ability to actually signal to the soil and take up nutrients from the soil, or pull them down out of the atmosphere, because they've been bred as a vertical integration of a suite of products that allows for profit. Um, and without those inputs and products, that seed doesn't germinate or grow. So, you kind of have two polar extremes on what's happening, and understanding how these different varieties are actually bred to rely on soil health or rely on synthetic inputs. And that's part of the big conversation that needs to occur. It also matters how degraded that soil is and how much time it's had to regenerate. So some soil may bounce back within 3 years, 3 crop cycles. Some might need the better part of 10 years to, really repair itself, depending on how much animal integration or continuous living cover or other polyculture living systems are integrated into that farming system. So it's not a one size fits all. And that's part of what I would say is holding back some of the conversation is those at the scientific level who kind of want a set of rear view facing answers the way they can get from the USDA database of a blueberry is worth XYZ in nutrition. They want to see that same level of aggregation of data on regenerative products, and the pilots are still too small to have it aggregated in that same level. But
Yeah.
they're all indicating that nutrition does go up as correlated with soil health when the right varieties are planted. And so there's definitely a
Yeah.
there, and it's something we all should be paying attention to.
But to your point earlier about the big firms, I mean, it seems like, this is, I mean, is it hard trying to raise money for initiatives like this to study this? Because I imagine there's probably a lot of people that are benefiting from the fact that the system doesn't understand the connection.
Well, that was one of the places where I really hoped that brands would be interested in kind of having a cutting edge conversation with consumers around the topics of taste, health, quality, and nutrition, because those are the metrics brands are based on in the narrative that they choose to have with consumers. It's typically around one of those metrics. What it actually does is it creates a cognitive dissonance within a company where they then have to come to the awareness of the fact that the rest of their products may actually be lagging in nutrition because they're not taking these things into account. So there are some brands that are going there in doing their own testing, talking about it with consumers. But there is that broader regulatory arc that needs to shift that actually allows for that consumer delineation along nutrition in a way that actually helps buffer some of the, I would say, the risk that companies might perceive is there in outing the fact that their heritage portfolios that they've made money on for decades may actually have been grown in a degenerative way that they now need to work on unraveling. And
Yeah.
that undoes the internal narrative that many of these companies have built around the quality of their
Yeah.
products in a way that cannot be overstated. And it is a very
Yeah.
hard approach to shift the narrative that has been embedded for 30 to 40 decades on feeding the
Yeah.
world, having the best quality food, all of those things, to then understand that the underpinning science of all of that has shifted enough for us to understand that those narratives are breaking down. But then they match up with what consumer awareness is around how food is impacting their health, how the level of processing of food is impacting their health. And so, it feels like we're ripe for that moment to happen of really understanding how much of this is tied to our human health. But I don't know, medically tailored meals or some of those other pieces need to go first to really show that empirical data before a lot of people will put their weight on this part of the system.
Yeah. I mean, I've thought for a long time that that should be a really slam dunk conversation for a brand to be able to say, we really took care of this soil. And because we took care of this soil, the cereal that you're buying from us came from wheat that was taken care of. And that nutrition is going to transfer to you, so that's why you should care of the soils. Yeah, ironically, we've talked about this a lot. Like, big brands are actually the ones that are perfectly positioned to have this conversation because they're deep in the ag system and they're deep in front of consumers. We just kind of have to chip away at it, right? One day at a
Yep.
time.
Well, they'd
Yeah.
have to segregate that volume to put claims on the package, which chips
Yeah.
away at the internal narrative that
That's,
they need to be purchasing commodities where they don't necessarily know who the farmer is and it's
yeah.
aggregated. And so that goes back to some of the problems with today's agricultural system and the impersonalization of it that allows some of these really big problems to go unchecked, I would say. So it is a multi-year effort. It will require dozens of organizations working across the system and for the regulatory agencies to get involved to get resolved at scale. This is also one of those entry points that makes people incredibly excited about the regenerative movement because it personalizes it. And so, in the same way that on farm economics can personalize regenerative agriculture for farmers, nutrient density and human health and taste, flavor, the strawberry that tastes like you remember it as a child, or the steak that tastes like you remember the turkey. Those are the things that get people personally invested in and deeply understanding how much they actually, I would say, have lost in their food system, the food system they grew up with, and the one they want to recognize again. Um, yeah, I remain quite hopeful, given how much attention is being played in this space, that the momentum's going to continue in a way that can't be undone. So I,
Yeah.
for my part, will keep working on it. I know you will too.
I am Stephen Ritz, a human exclamation point. Hello. I'm the founder of Bronx Machine. And what do I do? Uh, on any given moment, that's subject to change. It depends on whose trouble register I'm on. But I'm an educator first and foremost. Let me be clear. This is about education. It's about health. It's about opportunity. It is about ending poverty in this lifetime for those who need it most and stopping communities like mine from being the perpetual canaries in the coal mine. And I like to say that, we grow vegetables, our vegetables grow students, our students grow schools, and our schools grow resilient communities. But, we are a network of over 1,000 schools strong, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Wow. It's a
Growing
thousand
food,
schools?
yeah, growing food en route to outstanding academic performance and improve social determinants of health. So through our proprietary curriculum, project-based learning, and growing food in school and classrooms like
There it
this,
is.
where kids do crazy things. We've got some new technology I can showcase to you.
Oh,
We are changing the game on what is possible with and in public education, mindful of two simple things. One, the most important school supply in the world is food. It's not computers, it's not teachers, it is food. If you're not fueling your body and mind for success, you are fueling it for decay and someone else's financial gain. And number two is children will never be well read if they're not well fed. So making sure that children get the food that they need to fuel their minds, to fuel their bodies, to fuel achievement and understand the connections to that in school is a game changer. So that's kind of what we do in addition to raising a whole lot of hell. But uh, you know, uh, that's what we do. I'm the professor of sunshine, in the middle of public house.
And a
I
ray of
l
sunshine at all times.
Well, I try my best. You got to meet the wife. She's way better than me and better looking too.
I always wished I had a teacher or more teachers like you growing up in any subject, let alone ag and things like that,
Well,
but
I'm
like
not an ag teacher, man. So, This is the
Well,
deal, man.
okay,
I don't even
fair,
know the
but
formula for photosynthesis. I don't grow plants, I grow children. I kill a lot more plants than I grow. Don't
yeah.
tell anybody. I've never killed a
Well,
kid though.
this this will
I only
we'll
post pictures of the living ones.
we'll bleep that out. We'll be sure
Yeah.
to bleep that out.
Oh,
So
no,
you
leave it in.
you've
Let the
been okay.
truth be told.
Well, and how are they viewing the healthy food? Are they Stephen, how do you find that lands these days then as it relates to, toaster pastries or crackers or candy bars? Like,
Well, listen, it's really hard to be a kid these days, at least in my perspective. In my perspective, mindful. I was a kid in the '60s, so the kids are being the amount of messages, the official soft drink, candy bar, chocolate bar, toilet paper, tissue, water bottle of every single sports and celebrity in the world is just mind-boggling. We've got to stop monetizing children, for a greater corporate good and quarterly profits, and think about their health. So that's one piece. So it's tough to be a kid. The 99-cent menu, cheap food is so damn expensive, and it's killing us so slowly. So I want to be clear about that. The clown, the king, the colonel. Does anybody really think LeBron James brings Sprite at halftime, or Beyonce's giving Pepsi to her kids? I mean, like, to me, that borders on criminal. But it also brings it back to something that is really kind of cool, that you can grow food in school with kids. Now, older kids, they want cell phones, sneakers, and sex. Let's be real. They want money, they want food, they want that stuff. But little kids really get excited about growing food, seeing little seeds become big things and getting to eat them or sell them or bring them home to grandma. So I'm capitalizing on that. And, big kids, they may not like vegetables. Let me be clear, but they are definitely not allergic to money. And growing food is a license to print money in this economy, but not cheap food. I've never met a kid who's a spy. Yeah, man, I want to be the French fry clerk at McDonald's. I want to sit behind that bulletproof window in a bunch of polyester, and like really smell that grease. I've never met that kid, but I do meet young people who want to become chefs, cooks, entrepreneurs, ecopreneurs, aspire to do amazing things in a kitchen and save the world. And around the country and around the world, I'm meeting so many young kids who want to come together for an amazing global good, who don't care about Louis Vuitton and sneakers. They care about earthworms. They care about the fact that they're not going to have any clean water, that they're not going to be able to see certain animals and certain birds. And they are really coming together to do amazing things. Now, hey, how are you? I got teachers in the room. We've just got to be the adults and listen and pay some attention to them. And for me, that's my job. I'm president of the kids union. That's what I am. I retract everything I said. I'm just president of the kids union, and I'm here to make sure that they are going to have the biggest, brightest, best future possible. And
You're
that's what we do.
Your energy is so infectious. It's amazing. You've gotten the chance to not only do this day in, day out, but by now you've seen a lot of maybe young kid, like the preschoolers, like you were saying, come into your programs and you're doing the thing with them. And then you've probably gotten to see them kind of grow up into teenagers and maybe adults. Like how do they carry this knowledge that they learned when they were like 5 or 6 into their
Listen,
future?
so that's a great point, and thank you for that. Yeah, I've been teaching since the early 1980s, so I've got grandkids up in these classrooms, and I have students who have come through my program, years ago in a variety of ways. And my program has had a lot of ideations and iterations. Let me be clear about that. They seek me. Well, some kids just never go away, and that's cool. I roll with a very big extended family, thousands of kids. You got to see it to believe, and that's here in the Bronx. You start going overseas, it gets even nuttier. But you know, the fact that kids keep coming back means you gave them something. Now, I will be clear, I'm not the best teacher in the world. There are probably people who can deliver way more content than me. I still have an AOL account and a VCR that says 12 o'clock. Understand, I got a 1993 Toyota downstairs in front of the built with a cassette player and roll up windows.
Yeah.
It took me 2 hours to figure out how to get on this call with you between downloading and uploading and cutting and copying all this crap into a new window that I never heard of. But I think now more than ever, people remember how you make them feel in this moment. And, when you think about your greatest teachers or the greatest influences in your life, it wasn't what they taught you. Maybe it was, but it was probably how they made you feel and motivated you. And, all the data now, I am a data geek. That's one thing I am. I'm a big data geek. All the data teaches us one thing: the children who have access to one kind, caring adult will succeed in life. And it's my goal to be that kind, caring adult for as many kids as possible. Look, man, there's more information in this thing right here than I could ever teach. But, what do I teach? I teach compassion. I teach empathy. I teach, to show up, to grow up, uh, uh, to be there for yourself and each other. And that a computer will never teach. But when you do both right, it's amazing. Now we've got kids going to college. I've got my first kid who's going to medical school for free. The son of
Wow.
the daughter of two immigrants, neither of which graduated high school. We have 2,100 jobs here that we've partnered towards. I got a kid up the block who owns a business with a bigger net worth than me. So there are things here that have really happened with persistence and consistence and love that really can change the world. And
Yeah.
that gets me excited. Our film gets me excited. Our TV show, the things that we're doing with kids that are so disruptive. The fact that we're giving away things for free. That we've democratized access to certain things instead of turn them into cash cows for other people. That's really important to me. So it's you come down here and you think Lizette and I, my wife Lizette, are like the mayor and mayoress of the Bronx. I've got kids who think that I sleep in this cheese hat, that I really wear green shoes, that I don't have 10 toes. And on the flip side, I've got some older kids who, when I started this program with overage, undercredited kids and gang members, have stayed out of jail. Have stayed off of drugs, have ended poverty in their lifetime for their family and for their children, despite 3 generations of endless
Mm.
poverty prior.
Yeah.
So it's they opened up a new Wendy. Oh, I hope I didn't get in trouble up the block. It's like the Taj Mahal of Wendy's. It's big, it's glowing, it's got a playground and
Okay.
tons of
Sure.
lights. And everyone got so excited, like, ooh, new Wendy's in the hood. And our kids in this class learned that, Wendy's didn't pay their farmers 1 penny more a pound for tomatoes at the harvest time, in Florida, because they took a hard stand. And the kids were like, Mr. Ritz, that's not fair. And I'm like,
Oh my
you
gosh.
know it now. When kids, when parents hear that's not fair, you turn around and say, it's my house, not fair, pay rent. When I hear that's not fair, I get excited. I'm like, what are you going to do about it? So I got kids boycotting Wendy's. They're writing letters. They're not eating there. They're standing outside telling kids it's poison, don't eat it. They don't pay people who look like us a fair amount of money. We're creating dialogue. And every time I keep a burger out of their belly and replace it with a piece of locally grown fruit or produce or something that is better for them and the planet, these slow wins, they add up, man. You don't have to be great to start, but you got to start in order to be great. And, uh, it's the little stuff that adds up day in, the
Yeah.
habits that you can build on. Look, please don't give me another 50-page white paper. I don't want to see another one of those damn things for the rest of my life. I got one PhD. I'll probably have another, but it is useless. Show me actionable steps that people can take that become contagious, and that they want to do. And that rising tide that can lift all boats. And it starts with the power of one talking to another one. I always joke and say, when I see one Mormon running around the Bronx, I'm like, where's the other one? I hope nothing bad happened. The power of two to convince one is really what's amazing in the world.
Yeah.
So that's what we do. That's really in if I can be a little self-indulgent and talk about the film, I
Please
would
do.
love to
Please
talk
do.
about our film, Generation Growth. So when you hang up, go to www.generationgrowthfilm.com. Again, www.generationgrowthfilm.com. Watch the trailer and fall in love and see what's possible. The film was filmed 6 years ago, long before COVID. And, I could talk a lot about how many festivals it's won. I'll be at South by Southwest. We were just at Sundance. It's amazing what's happening. But the coolest thing about this film, filmed 6 years ago, is that it showed our program expanding across the nation. And 6 years later, what do we know? Every single school and every single child in that program is thriving. And that's what's up. That's a happy ending. And, the film will blow you out of the water. So we would love for people to see it. We'd love to arrange a screening. Please reach out to me. And, we're debuting, believe it or not, in the next 30 days, all sorts of new free content, standards aligned, TV shows that are produced by kids, 4-minute episodes with free curriculum. So it's a real interesting time that shows that we are the ones we are waiting for. And we can do this. Superman's not coming to this neighborhood. He's long, he got off the train way before it came uptown. He's not coming, and there's no man riding a horse down the streets here, either. But if it's going to be, it's on us, and we're the ones we're waiting for. So we're going to do it. And I've never been more optimistic. I've never been more inspired to see kids coming in each and every day. If you see what goes on here in the course of a day, you'd be amazed. So come visit. That's a big open invite, not only to you, Mike and Tina, but to anybody out there. We're an open book, so you could reach out to me and come visit. But in your own life, just take some kind of small, measurable step that you can improve upon each and every day. And amazing shiznit will happen.
I love
I'm
this
still
so
chewing
much.
on what you said about slow wins, Stephen, because that really is the name of the game in changing people's minds about food and nutrition and health.
Look,
Mike, that gets
I've
to some of the
yeah,
systems change we were talking about earlier and even what's needed to understand in nutrition. So I like that term. I'm going to be,
change. True change happens in small, powerful increments. It's not some kind of listen. I've seen more policy. This whoa, new policy. It's coming. It's gone. Small, consistent changes. Listen, I don't know if you know. I used to be 350 pounds. I know more about diets than anybody you ever want to meet.
I
But
didn't know that.
I was 350 pounds, man. I went from having an NBA prototype body. I'm still available, Mike, in case, you're talking to the Pistons. I'll get in shape. But, I got a little hungry, and the Clown and the King and the Colonel were everywhere down here. No one told me that, soda was going to make me diabetic. At age 50, I went from having a 45-inch jump to a 54-inch waist. I was 350 pounds. I had a heart attack. I was
Wow.
on 80 milligrams of Lipitor. I was eating myself sick, diseased, and diseased. And what did I do? Take more medicine and eat more food. It was just small, simple changes that made a difference. And now, God willing, I'll never go back. And I model that behavior. I have young people who've never seen me drink a soda, eat a hamburger. I show them pictures of me in the past, and they can't believe it. I got the shirt up here to show you. It's crazy. That's part of the backstory. So I could tell you more things, more ways to use Slim Fast. It tastes delicious, especially with Haagen-Dazs. But you'll lose the weight and then you'll gain it right back. So
Right.
it's really about bad habits being replaced with good habits, not temporary fixes. And it's the short, daily, consistent wins that can you drink a little more water? Can you drink a little less soda? You have a little less sugar, a little less salt,
Yeah.
a little less fried food. And add in some vegetables. And that's, part of what we're doing with the film is called the Healthy Student Pledge. And the Healthy Student Pledge is amazing. We've signed on thousands and thousands and thousands of children. To the Healthy Pledge because we want children to make small incremental changes that add up. Number one, can you share the message of the film if you like it? Number two, can you advocate for healthy food in your school? Number three, can you reduce food waste and eat seasonally? Can you prioritize the consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables over sugar and processed snacks? Do you know where your food comes from? And then three hard questions. Can you be kind to yourself? Can you be kind to each other? And can you be kind to the planet? And I've never seen a kid say, oh, Mr. Ritz, I don't want to be kind to you. I don't want to be kind to me, and I don't want to be kind to the planet. So we make it actionable. And that's how this starts. And, let me be clear. This work is hard, super hard. And it requires a lot of courage. You got to stand up, you got to take a stand, and you got to mean it, and you got to show up daily. But the opposite of courage is not cowardice. The opposite of courage is conformity, because even a dead fish can go with the flow. And I, my friend, am no dead fish. I am swimming. I'm a salmon, and I'm going to spawn. I just need one more hop. And so that's, what we do, small little hops that get us closer to the place that we can spawn and give eternal life to the next generation. And that's what this is about.
My gosh, I'm so glad we're recording this because you dropped so many bars. Bars per minute is just amazing. Before
Really?
we let you before we let you go and our next
Let
guest
me
comes
go.
on,
Stay. Come back.
by the way, you are welcome to stay on as long as you want. We
No, I
record
got a
for
little
another
time.
2
I
hours.
mean,
Yeah,
like
no,
this is fun.
you can hop off whenever you want. We have another guest coming on in a few minutes. He's probably downloading and copy pasting to another window, but
I
there's
hope
one
he had a
question.
better experience than me. Let me tell you.
He's a farmer. He's a farmer. He's going to come on in a little bit. But there's a question I like to ask everybody on this show. And Tina, I'm going to ask you this later, but I'm going to ask Steven now. And I'm dying to hear your answer to this. The question is, imagine you have a crystal ball and it can tell you anything about the future of food in the next 5 to 10 years. What would you ask the crystal ball?
I would ask the crystal ball to bang big business on the head. I pick up the crystal ball. I'd like to beat a couple of large CPGs on the head with it. That's number one. But what I would ask
Right.
the crystal ball is to really evidence for kids. Listen, when kids understand where their food comes from, that changes everything. We got chickens outside of the school. And when I ask kids, I come in the classroom and I say, how many nuggets? The kids don't know that someone had to kill that chicken to get those nuggets. So when children understand what goes into their food and how hard it is to produce food, that's the game changer. So, what I would ask the crystal ball to do is really to teach children the value of food instead of monetizing poverty and thinking we can end hunger with food pantries and this ridiculous, bucket brigade of, um, philanthropy. And let me be clear, I'm a very philanthropic guy, but we can't end poverty by giving things away. We've got to really teach people better habits, new behaviors, and to learn to love themselves like they love material things. We've got to demonetize certain ridiculous behaviors and prioritize health. And that's what I would ask the crystal ball to do. I'd ask the crystal ball to show the children the way to Fornio, to food-based diets, to, if anybody ever told me I'd be 350 pounds by drinking soda, I would have thought there was something stronger in the soda. So, to really be able to use the tools and technology that we have to, number one, grow better, healthier food and grow better, healthier minds and awareness. And, to get in there and realize that, we've got to love our children the way corporate America loves their quarterly income statements. And if we start prioritizing our children in that regard, instead of seeing them as epicenters of health and ongoing consumers into perpetuity, the world would be a better, brighter place for it. So that's what I will ask the crystal ball to do.
All right, welcome. We are here with our next guest here, Alec Gioseffi. Alec is the head farmer and head chef at Ironbound Farm and Cidery, one of the most idyllic places that I love to go to out in Hunterdon County, New Jersey. Alec, welcome to the show.
Yeah, thanks for having us, Mike. I'm super excited to be here.
So I always tell anybody who will listen to me about Ironbound. And I think you've seen that because I've brought people there and things like that. I've told Tina about it years ago,
To get
back in our
there.
days. You do need to get there, but maybe for like listeners that don't know, and maybe this will help get more people out there. Who are you? What do you do? And what is Ironbound all about?
Yeah, sure. So, my name's Alec. I'm a farmer and a chef. I started working with Charles Rosen, the founder of Ironbound, back in 2018. Um, Before I came out here, I was working in restaurants pretty much as maybe at 13, 14 years old, and then all through high school and college. At the time, didn't really think as like cooking or chefing was going to be my career, but it was just kind of like a hobby. I loved it. I grew up in a huge household where the kitchen was the center of everything, and I had a real passion for food. And then through time, I ended up working in higher end restaurants and falling under the farm to table category around 2017, 2018. I had previously met Charles Rosen and we kind of hit it off and collaborated on stuff from time to time. And then when they were at kind of a turning point with the operation here and wanted to integrate produce and livestock into the orchards and learned that they had the ability to open up a tasting room and have some level of food service here. I kind of got pulled into the mix and then just love the possibility and the community up here. But to answer your question about what Ironbound is, so the business started about 12 years ago in the Ironbound district of Newark, New Jersey as a workforce development program. And then Charles learned that the first industry ever in New Jersey was hard cider. And Thomas Jefferson and George Washington had their personal orchards in Newark, New Jersey, where they were making hard cider, bootlegging it as champagne, and sending it into Philadelphia and New York. And at that time in colonial America, people didn't trust the water, so people were drinking hard cider on an all day long basis back then. And in 2015, so the site that we're on was abandoned for some amount of time. It used to be a winery. Uh, as the legend goes, the winery owner and the farmers got into a fight and they poisoned the whole farm with Roundup to kill all the grapevines, and it kind of sat vacant for about 10 years. So Charles initially planted 10,000 trees with an effort to plant as many apple trees as possible to make as much cider as possible to put into the wholesale marketplace. At the time, hard cider was the fastest growing sector of the alcohol industry. And then as a few years went on, the market kind of changed a little bit. We learned that the orchard was kind of sick. The trees were anemic. There wasn't enough time given to kind of heal the land. So around 2017, they decided to rip out all 10,000 apple trees and start all over and do a 2-year long kind of like soil rehabilitation project with intensive cover cropping. But now, so kind of just fast forwarding forward the past in the post pandemic world. So I guess during COVID, we are producing as much product, meat, produce, and cider, and putting in the wholesale marketplace. Everything shut down. We realized with our winery license, we're allowed to have some level of food service on site. So, like, well, we have 100 acres. Let's have everyone come out here and do outdoor dining. So that really took off. We were seeing about 1,000 people on a weekend coming out here. At that time, the food model was kind of like farmed up street food. And then over the past 4 years, we kind of turned it to be like having visiting chef dinners and a little bit more of an elevated offering. We have a whole wood burning outdoor kitchen that we utilize. So we've kind of done a lot of different things. This is best for us. So yeah, that's kind of where we're at right now as far as the on-site agriculture and food piece.
How much does this lend itself to the conversation that you're having with your local community and those 1,000 people that, are showing up on the weekend? Does it change the nature of the depth with which you can explain that how things are grown matter for how it's tasting and what you're serving?
Yeah, absolutely. So when we do pre-shift in service, a lot of that is like a big spiel about the farm piece and what's coming up. And it's important because we're off the beaten path. So people come out here for this destination, like daytime activity. You pull in, you park, and you see the animals. It's pretty much an open house policy. People walk through the fields and the orchard and see all that. So it's a real immersive experience for our visitors. Um, so we try to give as much information, especially when it comes to things like livestock, because we practice in our kitchen like whole animal butchery and use literally every single thing possible. I mean, even when we're bringing in fish from like NJ fishermen, like we're buying whole fish, not just fillets, and we're saving the bones to make fumet that might be or a stock or something like that. So it's really, and as we're going through like our pigs on the menu, like it's really important for our staff to know that like even if two people order a pork chop at the same table, they're going to look drastically different if they're sitting right across from each other because you only get out of one half. You only get about 16 orders of bone-in pork chop or the loin chop, And depending on how the day goes, like they might look drastically different, and people need to know why. Why is this side have a little bit more fatty than that? Why does mine have a bone? Why does that not? So the education bit for our staff, and then the hope that they can relay that information to the guests is quintessential in our operation for sure. But again, it's like I think that education bit kind of varies depending on the time of the year. For whatever reason, people only think farms exist in the fall when there's apples and pumpkins. So we're
Yeah.
very, very busy Labor Day through Halloween. I mean, we're busy in the summer for sure, but like when we have those high volume days, people are just here with their kids and they don't want to hear the whole spiel. So sometimes you get like this really intensive educational experience, and other times it's kind of like, here's your food. So it does vary.
Well, I think one of the things that I think like America and maybe the world has been kind of trained on is that like average people is that like okay, if I go to a grocery store and get a pork chop or an apple or a tomato or something like that, it should be the exact same thing like every single time, right? And I think that's like kind of this in some cases it can be, but I think that's kind of like this limiting thing for farms like what you guys do where there is going to be a little bit of variation, and the variations not a bug, it's a feature. But like, do you think people kind of are okay to do they accept that when they see that my pork chop's not the same as yours, and do they understand why?
Um, I don't know that we've had many complaints about that. I think that as long as it's like articulated and answered correctly, that people understand that and are excited about that. I
Yeah.
think there's always like crazy. Sorry, my phone, I just realized was on low battery. I just want to charge it. So I think that there is it's a really good opportunity to like drop some crazy knowledge on people. Like, did you know that pasture raised pork with heritage breeds has more omega-3 fatty acids than farm raised salmon? So I think there's ways to like if someone
I didn't know that.
was getting like ripped off or something, we could drop some serious knowledge on them and then they're fine with it. But I'm not too sure about if that has been an issue as far as people feeling like
Yeah.
that it wasn't like a fair spread. But
Yeah.
yeah,
I just
but
think I just think like coming there, you kind of it's more visceral, like those kinds of nuances. And I hope that people can come to a place like Ironbound or other farms that are doing similar things and take that back into the real world, you know? Because I think that would help with just scaling regenerative in general, you know?
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, it's all about education. I mean, what we're doing is against the grain of what the industrial system wants, which means that it's dependent on education. And I think that it's so like, I mean, it's not just because I use this food in my team, but it genuinely tastes so much better than what you could get at a ShopRite or a mainstream big box grocery store, that if people are willing to taste it and have this experience, it kind of sells itself. It's hard to go back. Like it's just the quality is so much greater.
So Tina and I started this conversation talking about like soil and like soil from kind of a layperson's point of view, where like somebody that's just a regular person, not a farmer, just an eater might think, what does soil have to do with me? And the reason why I want to bring you on and you've so describe what Ironbound is, it's like a one-stop shop for a person to literally see how all the things you do are enriching soil, and then that comes back to them on the plate or on the plate or in the glass or something like that. So it's almost like you've got like a microcosm of what an ag system should look like out there from start to finish.
Yeah.
So we're almost at time for you. I know you're a super busy guy because you've got so much stuff on your plate. But there's a question I like to ask everybody. I want to ask this to you. If you had a crystal ball and it could tell you anything about the future food system in the next 5, 10 years, what question would you ask the crystal ball?
Yeah, I don't know how to phrase it into a question, but I think that the most important thing for us is to have immense focus on regionalized food system and get out of it industrialized, centralized system, because it's destroying our natural ecologies all over the place. It makes us extremely dependent when things like a pandemic happens, or how big or bad avian bird flu gets and eggs are a thing of the past, sort of stuff. and just like it creates so much resiliency within your own community. So that's a super important thing for us and where Ironbound is going in the future. I mean, this could be a whole other interview, but Charles and I are currently working to develop this whole farm stop concept where we're building about 15 to 20 farm stops throughout the state. We have our first one that's opening this spring in Montclair. And these farm stops are, I think there's about 16 of them throughout our country. And it's imagine a 7 day a week farmers market that is mixed with like a grocery store. But so it's about 50% all produce, regional based. The main goal of this is to get the farmer as much of the retail dollar as possible. In this country, the average farmer gets 15 cents on every food dollar because you have several distributors in between the farmer and the retailer.
Yeah.
So this consignment set up on produce, well, the goal is to get farmers as close to 70%, which is an increase. And then it will be a different setup for our meat and protein providers. So we're super excited about this concept that we've been working on the past 6 months. And I hope that this can be a model that can be replicated all over the place. So I'm not really answering your question. So, but I think so. Yeah. So I mean, yeah, I don't know how to ask the crystal.
Well, what's the future of regional food systems? And I don't know the answer to that, but I have a feeling that it's gonna involve some of the things that you guys are doing and trying to push that movement forward. So, Alec, thanks so much for taking some time out of your super busy day. It was really great to have you on here, and
Uh,
keep up the good work. And I hope to see you soon, buddy.
yep. Thanks, Mike.
Nice to
Nice
meet
to
you,
meet you,
Alec.
Tina. Take
Thanks,
care.
Alec. We'll talk soon.
Bye.
Bye. Sometimes it's like when you try to explain ag stuff to just regular people, it comes off very academic. And I love the way that like Ironbound does things because you can learn all this stuff without having it feel like it's like a lecture or a class, you know? And I think that's good for just mass appeal. Like you can just go there and absorb it and you're just gonna like get all that stuff. So I think like farms like what they're doing are huge, farms and restaurants like what they're doing. That's just like a huge part of the future. So yeah, I don't know,
Well, and
thoughts. We
that,
had a Yeah.
oh, sorry, that lived experience, I think for many is actually muscle memory, where once you see it, you intuitively know it. And so, yeah, that lived opportunity is amazing.
So Tina, we just had two great chats with Stephen and Alec, two very different folks, but I feel like very spiritually aligned. Any thoughts coming out of the conversation?
Yes, I mean, Stephen is always such a massive ball of energy that I end up feeling like I'm not doing enough in the world every time I talk with him. So it's always inspiring. But what he said about slow wins and, kind of the cumulative approach of continuing to put forth efforts that change people's minds and that allow them to build on your success. And I'm, kind of leaning into what he said with the students that have taken off over time and where they've ended up in the system. Ripple effect upon ripple effect upon ripple effect. What would the system look like if he had never taken part in any of that? And
Yeah.
what role can each of us do in helping to change the food system? So that's really resonating with me from the talk with Stephen.
Yeah, and I thought that too, because we were also talking earlier about like corporations and stuff like that. And like, it's almost like we've kind of pushed a lot of that patience out of the system because corporations have this like invented schedule of every quarter. You got to report this, this, and this. And it's almost like, I don't know, I get the sense that sometimes for big companies that want to do regen stuff, like regen almost doesn't like move fast enough for them, for the timelines that they're kind of expected. Because I mean, just hearing Alec talk about like, oh, we planted 10,000 trees and then 6, 7 years later, just kidding, this isn't working. We've got to pivot, right? And just do that, right? But it's like it's so much harder for like a corporation that has investors and stuff like that to say, like, you can't really, I mean, it's a shame, but you can't really go in front of your investors and say, sorry, the trees didn't work out. We got to rip them all out and plant it again, but it's going to be great, So yeah,
It
I,
does happen though. They'll make contracts with producers and then something will shift. And on that timeline, I think it's worth acknowledging one thing in particular. In many of the large corporations that are working on engaging consumers around a brand, especially a brand that's been built over years, that brand lead is typically required, mandated to change every 2 years.
Hmm.
And so then you have this new person coming in trying to make a different stamp and have different metrics and different outcomes while living to the brand ethos, if you will. And so it does make it difficult to kind of take a stand on something like regenerative agriculture and stick to it when the people who are moved into those roles every 2 years are not necessarily incentivized for checking the same boxes that people before them did. And so part of the incentive structure is about coming up with a brand image and sticking to it, but finding all these new ways to have that conversation with consumers that's ever changing. And it's very hard for brand leaders to operate within that cycle when they can never fully own what a brand is doing for longer than a 24-month cycle. And many of the innovation
Yeah.
cycles are 12 to 18 months anyway. So you kind of get one stab at launching whatever that thing is. And then if it doesn't do well out of the gate for 6 months or a year, it's gone. And whatever those contract growing positions were with farmers, if they were specific to that innovation, it is kind of like having the orchard ripped out in some way. So that happens, but it happens in a cycle that's somewhat hidden from the rest of the system. And it's not on display the way that you could go to a restaurant like Ironbound and be able to hear that as part of their story, that they pivoted and innovated and it directly led to that food that's on your plate in front of you and why
Yeah.
that was the right thing to do. We don't get to have that conversation with consumers when you're
Yeah.
working within a large company.
Well, and I think the beauty of Ironbound is that whole time that they were doing that massive transition, which some can see as very dramatic, they were still open. You could still go down there and like honestly watch them tear up trees and plant new stuff, right? But they could still like deliver an experience. It wasn't the exact same experience, but I mean, I don't know. That's just kind of like the emblem of like kind of going with it versus trying to fit everything into like a nice, tidy box. Um, we've been seeing, we've all been seeing as an industry, the royal we, the regen kind of, I'm reluctant to call it a movement, right? Because it's been around for so long, right? But like a lot of brands have tried to dip their toe into like regen. What do you think will happen first? Do you think a brand will just be so culturally strong that they build in the patience to make regen happen? Or do you think the public is going to be aware of it and demand it so hard that all brands will be forced to acknowledge it? What do you think is going to happen first?
There are three ways I could answer that question.
Yeah.
Um, One would be on how company commitments, CPG commitments are around regen ag as it relates to maybe the risk profile of their company and whether they view it as an investment in the infrastructure on which their food company is built. So acknowledging that the farmer has something that needs to be invested in and kept whole in order for your food company to succeed that transcends what a brand manager might do at an individual level. And
Yeah.
within that, you have some interesting brand commitments like Applegate would be a great example, and they're owned by Hormel and what they did with the Do Good dog and expanding into everything in their hot dog line being sourced regeneratively. And
Big fan of
Patagonia,
them.
which is owned by Unilever, did the same thing. They leaned into regenerative organic certification. Many of the other corporates have actually kind of shied away from taking that message to consumers, and so consumers can have demand for something that never quite ends up arriving at the grocery store. And
Mm,
even right now, those two brands I just listed are the only ones I can point to that are in basically every mainstream retailer, irrespective of size,
hmm.
across the US. I know I can go in basically any grocery store across anywhere in the nation and be able to get one or both of those brands versus some of the other foods that are in the regenerative certification spectrum where I probably have to go into a bougie grocery store to be able to access that. And there may be pricing barriers or perceived barriers right out of the gate that would keep me as a consumer from accessing it there. But I might be way more inclined to actually, know a farmer like Alec and have the farm stop that they're talking about, where I'm doing business locally and it's with somebody I know up the road or that I drive by every day. Um, it would we need a rising tide across all of these. But I would say if I've learned anything 2016 when I started working on regenerative ag in earnest. It's that the consumer demand lever is not coming online as quickly as we would have hoped, and it's not the consumer's fault.
Yeah.
They can only buy what they're offered. And so that's where I'm at, where it's got to be about foundationally changing it for the farm, at the
Yeah.
farm, on farm economics, and then
Yeah.
having brands understand how they can differentiate on things like nutrient density. And that piece is still coming from the fringes and moving its way into the center.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. Well, and you're right. I mean, it's a blind spot. Like, you can't ask for regen egg if you literally don't know it exists, right? Why would you ever say that, right? And so we've kind of all got to take an onus as the industry to talk about it. We spent a lot of time talking about regen egg, and then obviously there's this other kind of specter of um, you could call it low tech solutions, but there's like high tech solutions out there too, things like precision ag. Like, what's your sense about technologies like that? And do you think, like, I don't know, having an automated drone picking produce is at odds with the regenerative principle, or do you think those two things can kind of coexist in the future?
when it comes to mechanization, I think we're going to have to go there. Whether it's from a labor perspective, whether for political reasons or otherwise, um, there are just not enough people to do that kind of work, and that kind of work is very laborious,
Hmm.
intensive, backbreaking work. And so, mechanization that allows us to actually create living systems, I think is incredibly important. So rather than looking at how we till, spray, rip out or plant, how we harvest, process, care for, and plant as a means of um, overcoming the need to use chemical interventions. Like all of that, we're on the precipice of that, and that's getting a lot of attention. When you look at climate smart agriculture practices, it really is about how you manage the application of inputs to a level where you're applying just in time and just enough in order to manage the cost of those inputs.
Hmm.
Whether you're talking about conventional commodities at the center of the system, like a corn soy rotation for animal feedlots, or whether you're talking about regenerative organic plus plus, all of that needs to have some level of de-risking, continuous living cover, and a move forward in how we manage the water cycle, the soil cycle, for too much water, not enough water, et cetera. And I'll give you a specific example here. And one of the things that I'm working on in the background, in Minnesota last year, they had a 6-inch rainfall event. And many of the farmers that had been practicing what most would consider to be kind of the bare minimum of regenerative practices, so cover crops, no-till, and crop rotation, they if they've been doing it for at least a few years, something less than 10, but maybe more than 4 or 5, they did not have the type of disruption that that climate impact brought to farmers that were doing, just regular tillage, uncovered ground, no soil or root structure kept in the soil. The soil structure itself had been broken down from years of uh, chemical intervention and or plowing. Almost 2-1, the farmers that had those heavy intensive practices needed a crop insurance payout because of that rain event, and they lost significant topsoil in their fields, and it created a big erosion event. Those that were doing continuous living cover had water infiltration and recharged their own field aquifer, the local water cycle, and did not need that. And some of the parts of the insurance system and the actuarial system are starting to wake up to this fact that the stark difference between farmers that operate even at a bare minimum of regen practices, even on conventional fields, that their risk profile is that of a non-smoker, and those that are operating in conventional agriculture with standard practices that have been, are proven to be a degenerative, are the smokers in the system. And so, similar to what we saw 20 years ago, back in the early aughts, with health insurance, where there was finally enough clear, delineated data on what smoking does to your health, that it changed the nature of health insurance at the actuarial data level, where they then started charging people who smoked. We're at that point with regenerative agriculture maturity in understanding anecdotally that the farmers who have adopted those practices don't need a payout. And what we're hearing in our corners is that the insurance executives understand that we're on track for 3 degrees of warming by 2100. And at that point, their portfolio is literally dust. And insurance is the second largest form of wealth on the planet. Also, that there's not enough money in their coffers to pay for the current climate risk that they have. And we've seen that play out already with, fires in California and some of these rain events, like what I mentioned in Minnesota. And so the insurance industry is currently contracting, and at the same time, its risk has never been larger. They're getting out of parametric insurance in California. They're not offering home insurance in Florida. The crop insurance system is starting to catch up as well, except food and agriculture are the underpinning of all civil and economic society. So you're not just talking risk to your food stocks. You're not just talking risk to the economic market. You're talking all of your investments potentially being destabilized if we don't shore up what the risk is on farm in the field for farmers to adopt these practices as kind of the new bare minimum. And so there's a lot of work occurring there. And that's why I would say the regenerative movement I view as being very broad. I'm not a purist. I've worked with leaders in every single part of the system. It is a funnel, and it needs the widest possible funnel of the number of farmers willing to get involved in any way possible to change the mindset that they have around how beneficial soil health is to their own farm and economic bottom line, but then also what it means for having regional regenerative food systems, being able to step into the gap when events like COVID happened or the egg disruption. Those regional food systems have become much more crystally clear for everybody in what the role is that they play in actually feeding people when stuff hits the fan. So yeah, there's a lot there in mindset shift that starts in the field with the soil, goes through what consumers are able to access and have demand for, and then how the market actually values the risk reduction and the resilience of those systems in relation to their investments. And I want all of it. And as Stephen said, slow wins, small steps win the day.
Slow wins, small steps. A lot of great talk about markets. I want to bring on our next guest, Ryan Pintado-Vertner. How you doing? Ryan, hello. We're live. We're recording.
What's up? It's happening. Hey.
It's happening. Here we are.
Good to see you.
Thank you so much
it's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining. We've had a great conversation leading up to this. We had two farmers, one urban farmer and one not urban farmer, but also a chef as well too here. And we've been talking about the future of agriculture and all of its different forms and complexities. A lot we've focused on kind of the future of regenerative agriculture, which is a really good segue to bring you on, Ryan. So Ryan, for the people that don't know you, please introduce yourself and tell me a little bit about your company, Smoketown.
Yeah, for sure. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm Ryan Pintado-Vertner. The way I tell my story is that you can kind of split my life in two phases. There was the part one was when I was an activist in the nonprofit sector, like deeply committed to that phrase that Dr. Martin Luther King used of bending the moral arc of the universe towards justice. That was my calling. That's who I saw myself as. And then I discovered brand management and decided to make a big change. I'm in my 20th year of CPG brand leadership and stewardship in one way or another. And as part of that journey, I built a company called Smoketown. And what Smoketown does is we're a boutique consultancy that helps mission-driven brands and their ecosystems flourish through a combination of marketing strategy, fractional marketing leadership, and general growth consulting.
What's the origin of the name?
Thanks for asking.
You're welcome.
It is neither of the two things that most people assume. It is, if you live in California, you assume it's cannabis, and it's not that. And if you live in the South, you assume it's barbecue, and it's not that.
Okay.
There's a neighborhood in Louisville, Kentucky called Smoketown. That is where my grandfather grew up. It's where he and my grandmother spent the first years of their marriage, and also happens to be where Cassius Clay learned to box and eventually became known as Muhammad Ali.
Oh my gosh.
I named the company after these amazing stories that my grandfather used to tell about how improbable it was that, he would find a way to thrive, and that his children and grandchildren would find a way to flourish. So that's the origin.
Wow, that's pretty sweet. I want to visit this place. It sounds like a pretty dope place.
It is. It is.
Good
Yeah,
energy, good vibes.
I've been. Yeah, it's a good spot.
Yeah. Okay. So, a lot of your work, focuses on like kind of having enhanced kind of consumer empathy, right? Empathy for the person and things like that. How do you think you also maybe incentivize and encourage brands to not just have empathy for the person and their immediate needs, but like empathy for the planet? And can you kind of have empathy for both at the same time?
Well, certainly that's our like when we are our highest selves, we have empathy for all things, right? And the reality, though, is that human beings are like the human condition is real, and we are not always our highest and best selves. And part of the way I think that businesses can balance the reality of that tendency toward not having enough empathy for the planet is to tie the outcomes that are connected to the planet to what they themselves as a business and as individuals do in fact care about, right? So what businesses care about is resiliency. Businesses care about risk mitigation. Individuals, humans, care about nourishing our families. We care about uh, being safe in our environments. And so when empathy for the planet fails for its altruistic reasons and motivations, what can step into the gap is that there's actual real concrete things that are sort of higher in the human, Maslow's hierarchy of needs that nonetheless tie back to leaving the planet better than how we found it.
Yeah, yeah. So basically tie the livelihood of the planet to the livelihood of the individual, and you can kind of get a win-win there. Okay. I wanted you to come on last purposely because the previous two conversations were about, very farm centric, and that's great and amazing. But I think like this is the last important mile of like, okay, you've done all this great stuff on the farm to regenerate and grow great food. How
Mhm.
do you kind of get it into the hands of people, and how do you get people to really like want it? I want to give a quick plug. You put out a great white paper called "Unlocking Demand for Regenerative" at the Smoketown website.
Thank you.
And in there's a bunch of whole bunch of tips and tricks and insights on how to get consumers to care and to go for this. Like, what did you kind of learn from making that white paper up, and any experience on like how do you get the average person who's just grocery shopping to care about regenerative ag and what it might mean for them?
Yeah. Well, first, let me just shout out Tina Owens, who is the OG of white paper writing on this topic, and on whom
It's a group effort, by the way, but keep going.
yes, fair. Yeah. So NDA, let me say that. So let me shout out Nutrient Density Alliance, of which Tina was a core participant last year, for laying the groundwork for some of what I did and learned. So I talked with 20 plus executives across over a dozen companies and nonprofits in this space. A lot of folks who the audience would recognize as key players in regenerative. And what a lot of them said, the vast majority of them said that, for one, tying back to the point I made a moment ago, uh, consumer behavior is unfortunately tied to self-interest. And so what it looks like, what it takes to drive demand and interest in regenerative agriculture ultimately comes down to a question of, well, what's in it for the consumer? And what's in it for the consumer, beautifully enough, is better more nutritious food, nutrient density, feeding my family. I always tell this story about my mother. My mother knows for sure that the eggs that she buys at the supermarket today are not what the eggs were that she grew up eating. She can see the difference. It's the reason why she buys Vital Farms, actually. Like as soon as I introduced it to her, she was like, "Oh, okay, I recognize that egg. I don't recognize these other things, but that's the egg that I grew up with." Consumers have an intuitive understanding that that the food that they eat, not only does it need to be nutritious, I think there's a latent recognition that it's not as nutritious as it used to be. And the beauty of all the great work that folks like Utah State and Audacious and just an incredibly long list of talented people, they've proven that there's a relationship between regenerative practices, soil health, and nutrient density. So it's just a matter of figuring out how to articulate that in a
Yeah.
compelling and consistent way across years to drive that awareness with consumers.
I always think of like the wine industry and even like stuff like Wagyu beef because those things are very popular and they've very successfully uh woven this story of whether it's fully true or not on the Wagyu thing of like, oh, this cow was fed beer and massaged, and therefore, because we did all that stuff, you get the most decadent piece of meat you've ever had, or you get an amazing
Right.
wine, right? And I just kind of wonder, like, why aren't there more categories or food like that where you can sew a story about someone did something on a farm that made this thing better, right?
Exactly.
I want to talk, and this is a question for both of you, because Tina, you kind of touched on this before. You said earlier about the definitions of regenerative, and Tina, you said that you're not a purist, but I've had so many conversations with a wide range of people about the idea of trying to define regenerative agriculture. And sometimes it's a very contentious topic because there are some purists out there that kind of resist defining what regenerative agriculture is at all. They're just like, it's a mindset, it's not a philosophy. And I get where they're coming from, right? Because I think they're contrasting it with, let's say, the organic certification, which is a little bit more straightforward. It's like a punch list, like do these 25 things. And if you do all 25, you get the check mark, you're organic. Regenerative doesn't really work that way, though. And I think that maybe sometimes can be confusing for consumers because how do you almost sell something that doesn't have a definition, right? But then if you overdefine it, you kind of compromise the spirit of what it is. Um, what do you guys make of all this?
Um,
Tina,
do you
I'm
want to
letting
go
you go
first,
first.
Ryan? Okay, well, I'll jump in. So I would say, first of all, organic's regulated, and nothing else about the term regenerative is regulated. So let's start with that as a foundation. I've been around this block long enough to see the first mainstream definition of regen ag come out from Chico State in 2017. And that includes those basic principles that are included in most of the or all of the others. And there's really three segments of regenerative definitions. There's less pesticides, continuous living cover, like cover crops, and crop rotation and no-till. Then there's no pesticides, plants as inputs, etc., but not really embracing organic agriculture. Then there's Organic Plus Plus, which it builds on the certification of USDA regulations that goes beyond to include things like social values, so fair pay, animal welfare, and soil health metrics that are specific. And those three buckets, I don't care which certification you're talking about, they fit into one of them. And so I mentioned earlier, Mike, the funnel. The funnel has to be as wide as possible where you're talking about moving farmers from a conventional system into something that is focused on soil health. And many of those farmers, once they go on that journey of even starting the first bucket I mentioned in regen, they end up in the other two buckets at some point in their journey because they keep going in a spirit of continuous improvement because the path unfolds for them on what the value is. And, getting beyond the narrative that is the dirt fight between shelf space and on-box badges, we have to get beyond that because it is a disservice to farmers looking to move through a spirit of continuous improvement. And it is the way that you onboard farmers into those more, purist-led movements, if you will. They're never going to get there if you make it feel like it's a gate that they just can't go past and that it's polarizing and the extreme. And we've taken some of those approaches, unfortunately, within parts of the sector. And Ryan, I'd be really curious to hear your thoughts because you've seen this all unfold as well.
That was so well put, first of all. Like that's such a succinct articulation of kind of the three ways in.
It took a lot of
Here's
years for me to get to that realization, I have to
Yeah,
say.
yeah, it's very well put. And here's what I would add to it, bringing fewer years to it than than Tina has for sure. I think that the first place that I sit, that's just kind of an interesting observation that I've been thinking about a lot lately, is when you talk with folks who are truly investing in regenerative systems, who actually live in each of those three, like any of those three buckets that Tina articulated, they have the sophistication necessary to see their regenerative practices as a system, as an ecosystem. They're not like they don't get trapped in sort of like, well, I do this practice which is different from this practice. They see it all integrated together, and so the systems thinking is really quite brilliant. And then what's interesting is that that same capacity for systems thinking has fallen apart when it comes to how we think about certification, because really this is an ecosystem, and everyone, like, we need to figure out how to construct and like how to conduct an ecosystem of certification and consumer communication and retail partnership and farmer partnership, where we all understand one another's role and that each of our roles contribute to this larger system level outcome.
Hmm.
And that's just, candidly speaking, not where we are as of February 25th, 2025. It's not. And yet every single committed actor in this game can see the world in that system's way. So
Yeah.
what I encourage, the bottom line is, kind of to answer your most direct point, is if I think that we can get ourselves tied into a knot over precise definitions of regenerative for consumers and lose track of the forest for the trees. The fact is,
Hmm.
if the three of us went out on our street corners today and asked 100 consumers what organic means, we would get like 75 answers, and 10 of the answers would be correct. And that's 40 years into the organic movement, untold millions and billions of dollars invested against it. So the whole idea that there's some world in which consumers will have a perfect understanding of regenerative, even if we define it perfectly, is just literally nonsense and not grounded in the reality of people are living complex lives, and they've got a
Yeah.
thousand things to worry about that are not, and none of the thousand things is the definition of regenerative.
Yeah.
Having said that, though, and then I'll wrap my point up. If we, and the certifiers in particular, can bring the systems thinking that they're so good at in their day job to how they work together, this thing would be solved in a weekend.
Yeah. Yeah. I. You mentioned organic as a foil. Like, what do you think we can learn from the path organic took, that to do or to not to do to propel kind of regenerative forward? Like, what are some lessons you think we can pull from that?
Yeah. Can I defer to Tina again? Like, I think that Tina's seen,
Sure.
she
I'll
saw
be
that
your
movie.
foil. I do have a point of view on this. Well, and because, working on the certified transitional program at a large CPG that allowed consumers to help convert farmers from conventional to organic, the organic sector was completely unself-aware of the fact that less than 1% of the farmland in the US was organic. And that was 10 years ago. It was 2014, 2015 when we were doing that program. We're still at, maybe, I think we've squeaked over the 1% mark now.
Yeah.
Um, and part of that is that we did not acknowledge the transition costs that farmers had to undergo in those 3 years of moving from a conventional to a
Exactly.
organic production system with no way to segregate that volume and get paid for it. And by the way, the current farm bill that just got punted for a year, actually what's in limbo right now is whether or not we're going to pay farmers to help with their transition costs. That was something that got passed in the last farm bill. Unknown whether or not that's going to continue. So the bulk of the organic movement is based on imports, which is a food miles problem when you look at it just across the lens of sustainability, even if it is, better for human health in ways that are measurable. And so the regenerative movement needs to be soil-based, system-based, regional, in a way that the organic movement started based on imports, because the
Mm.
agriculture system here was so far removed from what we created in the certification spectrum. And then to build on what Ryan said and lean into your question, Mike, um, before the 1990 National Organic Program was codified into law, there were 25 states that each had different definitions at a regulatory level for the state on what was certified organic. And they had their own certification bodies and audits and processes, et cetera, and what you could claim in different amounts. who are we to think that the regenerative movement is going to skip over that step of the messy aggregation, feeding into something that becomes a more aligned outcome? And Ryan, you just leveled up my thinking about it in a whole different way, and how you articulated the consumer awareness of organic, because consumers don't tend to think of organic as being about soil per se. And yet, when you get in the inside of the organic sector, all we talk about is soil in organic versus regenerative. And we forget to
Yeah.
share the strengths of the organic movement, which is 900 less pesticides and inputs in the field, 500 less antibiotics and animal treatments and animal production systems, with mandates now for outdoors that have recently come. And 3,000 less chemicals in the manufacturing system. So no BHT in your cereal liners, no bisphenol A in your soup cans, no artificial colors and flavors. We have forgotten entirely to have that conversation with consumers as the strength of the organic system. And instead, we've reduced ourselves to talking about, well, is it organic or regenerative that gets the shelf space? So, Ryan, I'm curious if you have a build that you want to add to that.
Not
Obviously, I
really.
have a very strong opinion about this. So,
That was
thanks
awesome.
for giving me the chance to say it.
Well, I think a lot of, like, people will read a headline, maybe it says like, oh yeah, Roundup is safe, it's fine. And they might be only thinking of for them. Like they might be thinking that Roundup is only gently applied so that the portion of Roundup I'm eating is okay and it's safe. But they fail to forget the domino effect of stuff that Roundup will do to the farm and the soil, right? Like it's not just about you guys. So like I don't know, Ryan, like in marketing, right? Like how do you kind of mitigate this tension between people acting altruistically and acting selfishly? Like, can you have both?
Well, can you have both? The short answer is it's very tough to accomplish both and scale.
Mm.
That's the key question. If what we're trying to solve is, to trust Project Drawdown's numbers, that we need to get to something like 40% of arable land that's raised with regenerative practices, that's 40 times higher than we are today. A ridiculously large undertaking.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't mean to be so sort of like negative Nelly on the human condition right now, which is kind of how I'm coming through, I suspect. But the reality is, what it takes to shift consumer behavior at that level of scale
Yeah.
is probably not going to be consistent with primarily leaning into altruism, because
Yeah.
there's no history of folks like the three of us being able to accomplish that. Which, like, what I think, I mean, it's great that you had farmers on. Part of the hedge, like, to be clear, I do think that there's a path to driving consumer behavior here. I wrote a whole white paper about it, to your point. But the beauty of regenerative, and one of the reasons why it became my passion, is that the farmer incentive to embrace these practices is true above and beyond what consumer demand, whether consumer demand changes.
Yeah. So you mean farmers should enjoy the benefits of regenerative, even if their consumers have no idea what regenerative is?
That is my understanding from the
Yeah.
agronomists and the farmers and the folks at Mad Ag, and who I'm in community with. Like, the benefits are there. Now, obviously, that's not going to get us to 40% of arable land. So we need consumer demand and farmer, self-interest to combine to hit a number that large. But we're not 100% dependent on consumer demand, thankfully.
Yeah. Yeah. And one of the things I think that is great about the regenerative movement is that it doesn't just focus on, obviously focus on soil and the food a lot, but it's not just about that. There's elements of people. Let's care about people. Let's
Exactly.
regenerate communities and things like that. And I think there's sometimes I think it's a real perception. It's real that more sustainable food is more expensive. How do we kind of make this more accessible to everybody so that we're not so that just the Patagonia people aren't having regenerative and everybody else is having whatever slop it is? Like,
Right.
how do we kind of tackle that? Like accessibility of regenerative?
Yeah. There's two levels to that question. So or at least there's two levels to my answer. I'll put it that way. Like I think the first level of my answer is that sadly we have not taught consumers the true cost of food.
Mm-hmm.
So we're starting from a place where food prices are artificially low, farmers are going out of business, unable to transition, to the next generation of farmer, of farming in their households. Suicide rates are up. So we're starting from a baseline of an unrealistic set of expectations around the cost of food, right? Uh, which creates a pretty big challenge. And to then sort of pivot to what the fix to that potentially is, and here's another place where I think Tina's way ahead of me. But what I understand to be the situation and what feels like power and leverage is that there is a way to shift our subsidization or our subsidy framework from a policy standpoint to
Mm-hmm.
shift the way that we approach crop insurance, uh, to actually change some of those unit economics so that perhaps we get the price down, but not at but not at the cost of farmer livelihood. What's interesting about that, though, presuming that I'm right, that that's one of the solutions, it brings us back to a place where consumer demand can be leveraged. But now you think of consumers not as people who go buy food, but as voters, as people who can call their congressperson and say, what's going on? Like, why am I having to choose between nutrient dense food and the farmer who I care about down the street going out of business? I shouldn't
Mm-hmm.
have to choose that. Change the regulatory framework.
Yeah, go ahead, Tina.
Sorry, I was going to say, that's one of the reasons I actually do hold some hope in this moment for some of the political elements that are unfolding as it relates to food and health.
Right.
Is that an opportunity for us to turn that page? And to the yin to the yang of what Ryan just said around food costs is actually about some of the costs that are already baked in that are going unacknowledged. And so I've had this conversation with a lot of, I would say, executives who've recently left other CPGs who are understanding what the climate disruption cost is behind the scenes that is causing cost of goods to go up. And we're covering it as the cost of wheat went up or the cost of corn went up or the cost of potatoes went up, when actually when the companies who are measuring it know that it's behind the scenes climate disruption costs being passed off as commodity costs. And so some of what we're already paying in cost disruption and commodities is this baked in disruption that's happening from degenerative systems. And so
Mm-hmm.
the sooner companies come to the realization that that's a drag on their earnings, their dividends, their bonuses, their pay structures, that's one of the moments that we'll see a leap forward, because the system upon which their self-interest is based is disrupting their ability to even do business. And so
Yeah.
helping them see that that cost that they're passing on to consumers, just as, the cost of doing business, that there's something there that could have a risk reduction and a resilience going forward that makes their own paychecks more viable. I happen to believe there's something there, and we're approaching that moment where that's going to happen. I'll leave it
Well, and
there.
I think that, I mean, the two biggest things that I think, we've got egg prices and we've got a lot of LA burnt down this year, right? I mean, to me, those are kind of like very in your face, tangible pieces of evidence that like there's something going on that could have prevented those things, had we had a more distributed farm system. So maybe just a small patch of chickens got bird flu, not a ton of them. And same thing with, droughts and stuff like that. We've danced around this topic of politics before this, but I want to tackle it right head on. Ryan, RFK, MAHA, what's your assessment of that?
Here's one thing that's, I think, probably undebatable. The number of earned impressions of awareness associated with regenerative agriculture and the other bullet points that are in the MAHA agenda just got turned up. But I'm actually asking my PR firm to literally pull the data to see how those PR hits and the total unique visitor impressions have increased. But it's been turned up a lot, and it's only and we're like a month
A
into
month
the
in.
right.
Yeah.
So I think what we can count on is for as long as RFK Jr. lasts in the role, which is another question. What we can count on is that the volume is going to increase against some things that we all actually have been advocating for and wanting for a long time. So that seems clear. I think what I'm hearing from people who know more than me is that that's running in direct conflict with the Trump administration's other agenda, which is to execute deep cuts, maybe even drive a certain level of chaos and put like really visible, aggressive, exploding wins on the board to feed the base. That seems like it's getting directly in the way of what RFK Jr. might have been otherwise able to literally accomplish from a policy standpoint,
Uh-huh.
were it not for that sort of approach on the other side of the White House. So that's
And if
my own
I
read.
could jump in there, Mike, that's well said, Ryan. And I hold those same questions when like the climate smart commodity grants or the IRA money that was meant to help farmers actually adopt these same practices that are basic within a regenerative system, that we're pulling the rug from even what farmers have been promised at the same time that we're saying the demand for that food, the interest in that food, the outcomes of that food. And by the way, we all now suddenly understand what it means for our health and our systems and our national security and our next generations. Those two things are in tension with one another in a way that I really hope gets resolved soon, because the farmer right now is the one that's actually standing to lose the most in this,
Exactly.
followed completely by um, developing brains and what we're feeding our children, followed very quickly by medically tailored meals and people using food as medicine, and then followed by the
Yeah.
general populace on whether or not we end up
Yeah.
chronically ill later in life.
Totally.
So there's a big leap forward that needs to happen across all of those fronts.
Yeah, and I think it's like RFK to me kind of seems like if you're looking at him from the standpoint of the regenerative movement, he's almost like chemotherapy, where like he might be able to secure the objective, but there's going to be a lot of really gross side effects too, maybe for men. And your point, Ryan, too, of him lasting, because he kind of feels like the odd duck in that whole crew, right? He could, who knows, right? Who knows? I hope he'll be able to at least advance some of these things in terms of cleaning up the food system a little bit further, and hopefully without too much collateral damage. But that might be fantasizing at this point,
Mike,
right?
but
I don't know.
maybe we should be asking ourselves is, does the MAHA movement and that moment in time for farmers, for consumers, for health, for all of it, is that now a self-sustaining movement that does or does not require RFK Jr.
That's
to take
true.
over? Have we reached
Yeah,
a moment of in the system where people are fed up with what they've been told is the narrative, and that narrative is now going to be disrupted no matter what?
that is entirely I mean, I think that, yeah, I think there's a lot of truth to that, honestly. I think people, because that's sort of one of the biggest components of Trump's rise is, right? It's like we don't trust the system, right?
We don't
And they
trust the
didn't trust
narrative.
this. They didn't trust the system enough to elect him, who's supposedly breaking the whole system, right? So, okay. When it comes, I mean, bringing it back down to consumers, like Ryan, like, what are some magic wands, if you had a magic wand to wave, that you might want to wave if you want to kind of expand the regenerative movement faster and deeper than it would have gone before?
Yeah. Here's one of them. I would gather the let's call it 100 of the most engaged and resourced stakeholders across the ecosystem, and I would put them all at like White Buffalo, Canyon, Halama Canyon Ranch, like retreat center for a week with some like phenomenal facilitator, like maybe it's Phil Taylor from Mad Ag or somebody who brings that kind of like spirit, and they are not allowed to go home and see their families until there is a collaborative, coordinated game plan to take advantage of this moment. Because to my earlier point, regardless of the potential for collateral damage, what is measurable is that for the next 12 to 24 months, consumer awareness of a broken food system, a potential solution for it, and that potential solution being called regenerative agriculture and healthy soil will have never been higher.
Mm-hmm.
And that window is not open forever. It's open in a finite time. So I'd wave a magic wand, get them all in a room, can't come home until there's a coordinated plan that's like full funnel from a consumer standpoint, that takes care of farmers, that puts some pressure on legislators to push the farm bill across the aisle. That's what I do.
I mean, apologies for the metaphor, but it's almost like they would have to create like a regenerative Project 2025. That's a flip. That's a flip.
I'm not sure that I will allow you to apologize for the metaphor.
No, I
There
mean,
definitely
but
needs to be a master plan.
Yeah,
that's what I mean,
it's
that's what
facts.
I mean, I love that because at the same time, it sounds like a truly magic wand thing, but it also doesn't sound like a magic wand thing because I'm just like, you guys are like 12 plane tickets away from that happening,
Yeah,
you know?
I agree with you. I literally, yes, it's like, it feels achievable. It feels doable.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, I mean, like, I mean, has Gates spent much time on regen? I don't know. I mean, he's got a lot of causes, but like, I don't know that any part of his like philanthropy is focused on
It's
regen.
synthetic
And it's,
biology for the most part.
yeah, he's gone that other direction,
Biotech.
right? Yeah.
And there's
Eh,
probably not a single human being who you could choose who the MAHA movement is more allergic to than Bill Gates. Like, so he's for sure not the guy.
And I think I sometimes wonder why he went that route instead of the regenerative route. And maybe it's because, I don't know, biotech things tend to be, in theory, more straightforward of how you get 100x your money, I guess.
2 words,
Is it that
intellectual
simple?
property. Intellectual
Well,
property.
okay, I think that's the same answer in a way.
Yeah,
That's
I
the
think it is.
means, that is the means to 100xing your money, right? But
Yeah,
yeah, okay. I guess that makes sense. Yeah, it's a shame. It's like, that's why I'm so disappointed in Elon, because you know what that wealth could do to the world? My gosh.
oh my goodness. Yeah,
That's $400 billion. That's an obscene amount of money. And
it is.
it's like he could literally, like, us dropping $100 bill on the sidewalk, turn this whole thing around. But you know, here we are, right? Try to do our best. Ryan, we're almost at time. Thanks so much for coming on and gathering time. I gotta ask you the signature question of the day for the show, which is: you have a crystal ball, could tell you anything about the food system in the next 5 to 10 years. What would you ask it?
What would I ask it? Not what's
What
the
would you
answer it
ask
gives
it?
me, but what would I ask?
Don't have to have any answers. Just what would you ask it?
What does it take to get my magic wand to work?
Well
So
said.
what is it by transitive, by the transitive property? It's what would it take to get those people at the
Yes,
ranch you're talking about?
correct. That's my question.
That feels doable.
It does feel doable. New
That
goal.
feels that feels doable. And maybe that you've manifested this out to the interwebs. We can get one step closer to actually manifesting it in real life.
We'll see.
Any final thoughts, Ryan? Anything out there that you think people aren't talking about enough?
I think we've covered it. I think that this is a unique window. These windows don't come along very often. Tina's been around the block enough to know that this is an exceedingly rare window, and we've got to jump through it. We have to.
Yeah. All right, cool. Well, Ryan, again, thanks for your time. Everybody, check out Smoketown and their wonderful white paper. Ryan, keep fighting the good fight. So glad to have you in our orbit. And again, have a good day.
Thank you. I
Okay.
appreciate
See you
being
soon.
invited.
See ya. Bye, Ryan.
Bye.
Tina, let's bring it home.
Yeah. Well, I will say one of the things we didn't get a chance to talk about with Ryan that is quite interesting in his theory is that there needs to be a kind of a master commercial for consumers creating that awareness around nutrient density and regenerative agriculture benefits, as opposed to individual brands trying to take that on their own.
Oh, you mean
And
like a
so
like a got milk for regen?
Yes, yes. And so I want to draw that out and just emphasize it a bit, because he's the only person I've heard talk about it through that lens of, kind of a master brand play for the regenerative ag movement writ large. And I do think there's something there that takes the weight off of the individual brands having to educate their consumers about what regen ag means in a bespoke way that doesn't feel like they're repeating talking points from their competitors,
Yeah.
and instead sets a layer of quality. So, yeah, I highly recommend people check out the white paper that Ryan wrote. It was very instrumental.
But that's a super intriguing idea. Like, can we get a pre-competitive kind of initiative to just say, here's the basics of what regen has, so that at least, if you're trying to sell wheat thins, you don't have to spend the first 5 minutes explaining what it is. People, at least more people will know what it is, and they can just kind of jump to like, what do these wheat thins taste like?
Well, and look at
Um,
like Got Milk Money. When was the last time you actually saw a Got Milk or Beef It's What's for Dinner or Pork the Other White Meat, right? Like, when's the last time you actually saw one of those messages? And yet it still you still know what that message was. It's been so embedded.
it is. I spoke at a dairy conference once, which was wild. But one of the things that I was asking them, or I don't know, I came up in the conversation. It seemed like they had a very viscerally like averse reaction to the got milk thing, because the thing that they say that didn't really come up a lot in the mainstream reporting of it is that it made milk very top of mind. Obviously, still today in 2025, we're talking about that damn campaign, but it didn't boost sales, which
Interesting.
which I thought
What
was
if it actually
interesting.
was just holding the line on existing sales and
That's a good point. Yeah,
keeping it
maybe they
relevant,
would have.
right? There are brand
Yeah,
metrics on relevance of a product that
you,
are about holding the line as
you're
opposed to
right.
losing or gaining sales.
Maybe they would have been 4% down had it not been for the campaign or something like that.
When you've got something that is that specifically keeping something top of mind, I think it's more about protecting entrenched volume than creating innovation and growth.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, that's why Coke still advertises. Everybody knows what Coke is. They just
Very good
need you
point.
to they just need to bring it to the top of your inbox,
Yes. And
mental
relevance,
inbox.
right? You're remaining in relevance. Yeah, good point.
And then the other thing I think about too is also those campaigns came out in a drastically different media environment. Like I sometimes even wonder, could you even create a campaign like that succeeded on the same magnitude in today's environment?
Just have
Especially
to hire a
knowing,
whole bunch of influencers.
yeah, it looks different, right? It's not centralized. It's like, but also too, like again, it comes you brought up earlier about the general distrust in, like, institutions. Like, to me, I think one of the hallmarks of social media is that it created testimony. It made testimonials scalable, meaning Coke didn't necessarily have to sell their new product from them, and in fact, in some cases, it's a hindrance if Coke is telling you how great their product is. It's better to hear your 100 friends that you follow closely on social media to tell you that it's there, and Coke's just kind of sitting in the background, like, reaping the benefits, right?
It's the standard.
So I just wonder, like, it oddly sounds somewhat dystopian even to think of like the milk industry saying, got milk, like it's like, oh my gosh, like big milk is trying to come after me, right? um so yeah, I don't know. I don't know what a got milk campaign looks like today. Maybe I don't know. Maybe it's the things that go viral on Instagram or TikTok for 2 weeks and then flash out, right?
But those things that go viral do, I think, lead to a new level of consciousness and expectations, especially around food and your relationship to food and the experience of food in a way that there is no end to that resonance. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Oh, master brand campaign for Regen. We'll just put a pin in that. Come back to it later. So, are you going to ask me the two big questions of the day? Because
Oh,
crystal ball and or magic wand. I'm delighted to
well,
use both. Let's see where it
yes,
goes.
we are drum roll leading up to that's the finale for this. Thank you for asking. I'm gonna ask the magic wand question first.
Magic wand. So yeah, I quite frequently like to think that I already have a magic wand, but regional regenerative food systems, like what Alec was mentioning earlier in the food stop piece, I would, having a small farm here, understanding how core consumer demand and interest is in those food systems, I would really like to see that level of resilience built back into rural America, if not urban America, in a way that connects people to their food. I actually think we're going to have to kind of go that route at some point. And bird flu disruptions, COVID disruptions, those have kind of brought home just how fragile some of the systems could be. So being able to create that connection. Um, I would also say the organic sector being able to scale well beyond the pale of anything it's done so far in a domestic way would
Hmm.
be an incredibly important thing to happen for not just our food systems and what we eat and the nutrition of it and the lower pesticide, chemical exposure, et cetera, but actually just for our the biodiversity in our ecosystems, coast to coast, and what it means for pollinators and beneficial insects and the birds and the bees and everything that's on the ground and under it. We can't get there fast enough, and the degradation of the biosphere is, in fact, one of the largest ongoing risks that we have to our quality of air, our quality of food, and our quality of agriculture, the water cycle, you know, really disruptive weather events, or not enough moisture and drought. So I can't say enough there about how much we need to shift there and very quickly in a way that's
Mhm.
supports human health.
So you need information to do that a crystal ball might be able to tell you. In service of that, what would you ask that crystal ball?
Well, I'm gonna go a way that's gonna sound hopeless and a way that's gonna sound hopeful. Oh, and I've
I
been
love
working
it.
to
I
get ready
love
for
it.
this apparently.
You gotta, yeah. I feel like we, as realists, we gotta have one foot in each, right?
Yeah, so if I had a crystal ball, I would ask what the actual calculations are around ocean acidification years.
Oh, whoa.
Yeah,
Okay. Oh,
that
first mention of
used to be
oceans right now.
2100, kind
Explain.
of like really far out there. Back of napkin now is like mid 2040s. It's really
So
close in.
why is ocean acidification important in your
That would
context? Your question.
be the removal of oxygen that supports life within oceans and in a way that affects all rivers, lakes, and streams because the ocean flows inward. So you're talking all water systems on the planet having some level of degradation or collapse. So that when I look at a crystal ball and what I'd actually want to know, it would be how do I compel people to move towards a future in which water runoff, water quality, water cycles, regional water systems are top of mind. The second thing would be with the crystal ball would be how do we help people understand that raising the floor and not just raising the ceiling is incredibly important in setting new baselines for the food system and where those targeted intervention points could be that help people get on board as quickly as possible to stabilize food systems.
Oh, wait, I want to pause. Raising the floor, not just the ceiling. I mean, I've never heard that phrase so
I don't know
eloquently
of
put. I
anybody that
like,
uses it. And can I double
well,
down
you
on it
do.
real quick? Because
Yeah, I
I've
want
been
you
in the
to. Yeah.
organic hallways since 2008, and I've started to take people to task a bit on the dirt fight around organic versus regenerative. And as I mentioned earlier, farmers move through a series of phases of understanding and mindset shifts as they're weaning off of the culture and the past looking way of farming that has been the 1980s carried forward on steroids. Scaffolding. The organic system is based on scaffolding of farmers who have a vested interest in moving ever closer to the organic system. And so if you're constantly shooting farmers in the foot or a circular firing squad about somebody not being good enough because they're just barely organic or what have you, you're actually pushing away the funnel of innovators and people, adopters that come into that space. And so and the reason I talk about raising the ceiling versus raising the floor, the example I will use is actually around organic milk. And
Mhm.
so the organic firing squad in the past has had an interest in criticizing very, very large dairies that are certified organic because they're not the pastoral, small view that they have of organic, in its purest form.
Yeah.
And, one day I did an exercise with myself because I know people who work for those large dairies. I was part of a corporation that had very large dairies, and there's a lot of good that can happen within those systems. And I asked myself, what would happen if all dairies in the US had that bare minimum of organic that the purists in the organic system say is not good enough. And Mike, when I realized the number of antibiotics that we would get rid of, the amount of cows on pasture, the acres of continuous cover, the additional nutrition that's going into our schools for the milk campaigns that go to students, um, the biodiversity that those systems would drive, the amount of pollinator habitat, just the health of every single part of the system. If that was the floor, what would the ceiling look like, right? And then you start to realize the current system can't stretch any further than it's already been stretched because most of it has been designed for the middle. And so if you want to move the top, you've got to move the middle, which means you've got to actually shore up the floor so that the middle is somewhere else that's closer to your position. And so wherever possible, I've started taking an intervention approach that is about the middle of the system that creates the scaffolding or raises the floor so that the rest of the system that might be in my pantry, my refrigerator, on our land, or in my colleague or family set, that system has even a chance of thriving in a climate volatile future. And so I no longer want to raise the ceiling. I want to raise the floor. And thanks for letting me talk a bit more about it, because I think it's incredibly important in this moment.
My gosh, amen to that. And that, that also kind of goes metaphorically back to the access issue. Like, what good are we if we have the lowest floor possible, but also the highest ceiling possible, right? I mean, I think
Good point.
that's a true hallmark of a society is how the people at the bottom are treated. Because the people at the top everywhere are kind of the same. Like, the people at the top will be fine. It's how do we have the sea rise for everybody, so to speak. What's one practical thing you think a person that doesn't work in food can do every day to kind of help this? And what do you think one practical thing a person that does work in food can do to kind of help advance regenerative?
I would say choose the thing you eat most every day, whether it's oatmeal in the morning or a steak or a chicken or something, and find a way to purchase that from something that you know has integrity in the system and that you're
Mm.
helping to contribute to. It doesn't have to be a wholesale shift of your
Hmm.
entire diet. Back to what Stephen was saying, slow wins, small changes. And make sure that that system is one that you're voting with your dollars so that you know at least you've done your part to help it continue.
Nice.
And then if it, toothpaste or your hair products or whatever, your clothing, cotton, or regenerative cotton, whatever it is that next speaks to you, do that a while later,
Yeah.
right? And then just keep going. And you'll find that the more of us that do that, the more we will have voted for a system that is worth having and one that we can feel proud of and that we're excited for our neighbors and our friends to partake in with us because it acknowledges the community of those systems and how it impacts our own bodies.
I think that's so great because I think it's like a inverted like broken windows theory. The theory that like if there's one broken window at an empty warehouse, everybody else feels like it's okay to break all the other ones. Whereas it's kind of like flipped. It's like take the thing. Okay. I mean, and I love starting with very practical, the thing you eat most, right? Because I think if you try to tell everybody to like buy all regenerative, that's really hard and impossible, and mentally they'll just shut down. Yeah. Okay. What about people in the industry and specifically in the industry who like aren't already working directly or indirectly on regenerative things? Just like, I don't know, some brand manager at the company that's never said anything about regenerative. Like, what's a practical thing they can maybe do to advance the mission?
I can't say this one enough. It's recognizing that every job is a climate job. Every job has the
Mm.
chance to be regenerative. And so maybe it's being regenerative in your relationships around you in a corporate environment that's very cutthroat. Maybe it's making sure that when you have the choice of how your brand is going to source something, that you very deliberately make a choice that you know is about sustaining the farmer or the supply chain in a way that comes closer to regenerative. And it's about seeking out those relationships that can help you reinforce that with a business case behind it. Because if you're in a large corporation, especially, one, you're very likely to diminish what your own agency and power is within that system unless you see other people that you can collaborate with. And
Hmm.
two, um, you have to find a business case to be able to do some of these things. And, I originally got my introduction to almost all of my sustainability work in the past through the lens of cost savings and non-GMO and organic sourcing, and then energy savings and other things, within production systems. And there are ways to do the right thing and have it be cost neutral or even cost savings. Now, I don't mean that at the expense of the farmer and what we're paying the farmer. I mean looking at your, production cycles or the way you contract or bundling things in a different way within, the partners that you're choosing to source from. There are ways to accomplish these outcomes that get beyond the competitive cutthroat approaches that are typically the culture of even small boutique shops now, because of what we're told is the competitive behavior that leads to success, and that we're meant to want that. So yeah, defining success in a different way and understanding our own agency within it, and then deliberately seeking out those partners, those thought partners that help you refine in a way that is about how you and I met, and refining ideas around how to implement regenerative agriculture at scale. There, what is that saying of never underestimate the power of a small group of people. In fact, it's
Mm,
the only thing that can change the world. I know I'm
mhm.
botching it, and I can't even remember who said it at this moment to give it the due credit. But I have certainly found in my own life that that is true, and I suspect if you looked at the change you've been able to drive, that you would probably say something similar. Would you?
I absolutely would. Yes. It's the hardest thing for us because, doing mission-driven work, like, sometimes people are like, "Oh, why are you working with that big food company? They're gross," something like that. And I say, like, they're not a monolith. They're just made of people. And yes, there's probably some people in there that are gross, but we seek out the people that are, like, kind of the insurgents, that wanna kinda turn things around. So, that's what brought us together, what facilitated this conversation in a way. Tina, always great to talk to you. Always intelligent, always thought provoking. How can people find you? What do you have to plug?
Well, they're welcome to reach out on LinkedIn. I would also say, shining this back at you, Mike, on the innovation, understanding the future projection, and the forecasting ability that you have is something that is beyond what I've seen in working with multiple brand managers and innovators over the years. And so, making sure that people are plugging into everything you have to offer on where the food system could head next, and you don't shy away from even the dystopia of it all. I find it to be incredibly thought provoking, and it helps me lean into my own innovative theories about the system. And so let me just take this chance to say thank you for the ongoing conversation, partnership, and also for your leadership within the system. And it's lovely to just take the chats we normally have and crystallize
Do
them
them
in a
here. I
recording
love
and
it.
see what happens next. So thank you for that. I appreciate the opportunity.
Well, thank you so much, Tina. Thank you all for listening out there in internet land. This is the Tomorrow Today show, and hope you have a great day. Thank you so much. Thanks for listening to this episode of the Tomorrow Today Show. The Tomorrow Today Show is a production of the Spoon Podcast Network, with writing, hosting, editing, and music by me, Mike Lee. Stay tuned for more episodes to come in Season 1.